Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen and enjoy my stories every day. I used to believe our marriage was built on unshakable foundations. 12 years together, filled with shared laughter, late-night talks, and the quiet rhythm of a life we built brick by brick. We had our rituals, our shared inside jokes, and that comforting sense of predictability that comes from knowing someone so deeply. Or at least, I thought I knew her. Sarah was everything I had ever wanted in a partner, charismatic, witty, and impossibly kind. Or so it seemed. Even now, with hindsight glaring its blinding truth at me, it's hard to pinpoint when the cracks began to form. They were subtle at first, like a quiet shift in tone or the way her smile sometimes didn't quite reach her eyes. But the turning point came when the phone started buzzing. At first, I didn't notice. We were always busy, me with my consulting work and her with her marketing job. She had always been glued to her phone, answering emails at all hours, so the constant pings weren't out of the ordinary. But her behavior was. She started guarding her phone like it held state secrets. It went with her everywhere, the bathroom, the shower, even to the backyard when she stepped out for a quick breath of air. Still, I brushed it off. People get busy, stressed, distracted. It wasn't until the evening her phone buzzed while she was in the shower that my suspicion took root. I was on the couch, half watching a documentary, when her phone lit up on the coffee table. The message preview caught my eye, still on for dinner. It was signed with just an initial, M. I stared at the screen, feeling the first tug of unease. Dinner? I didn't remember her mentioning plans. And who was M? I wanted to believe it was nothing, but the sinking feeling in my gut told me otherwise. By the time she came back, I had slid her phone back into place and buried the doubt. Who's M? I asked casually over dinner a few days later, testing the waters. Her fork froze mid-air, just for a moment, before she recovered. Oh, Mark from work. We're brainstorming ideas over dinner tomorrow for the campaign. Her smile was disarming, her voice steady. It was a plausible explanation, yet something about it felt too rehearsed. I told myself I was imagining things. Sarah had always been friendly with her colleagues, she was the type of person everyone gravitated toward. But that moment stayed with me, and once doubt takes hold, it has a way of growing. The next few weeks brought more signs. There were the mysterious work trips she hadn't mentioned until the last minute. She began staying late at the office, claiming urgent deadlines. And then there were the phone calls. Whenever her phone rang, she'd step into another room to take it. If I walked in, she'd end the call abruptly, saying it was nothing important. Each incident, small on its own, started forming a pattern I couldn't ignore. But the breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday morning. I had taken her car to the mechanic for a routine check. While cleaning out the back seat, I found a hotel keycard nestled between the seats. It wasn't from any hotel I recognized, not one we'd stayed at on family trips or anniversaries. My chest tightened as I turned the card over in my hand, the name of a luxury hotel printed in gold. A hotel far too close to home for it to be part of any legitimate work trip. I sat there in her car, the rain tapping against the windshield, my mind spinning. This wasn't paranoia. This was something real, something ugly. When Sarah came home that evening, I didn't confront her. Not yet. I watched her move around the house, chatting about her day as though nothing had changed. My anger simmered beneath the surface, but I knew I needed more. If I accused her now, she'd deny it, find some way to wriggle out of the truth. No, I needed proof. That night, after she fell asleep, I took her phone and went through it. To my frustration, there was nothing incriminating. No texts, no photos, nothing that pointed to an affair. If she was hiding something, she was good at it. But I couldn't let it go. I wouldn't. The next day, I called Mark, an old friend who worked in private investigations. Mark was discreet, reliable, and, most importantly, loyal to me. When I explained the situation, he didn't ask unnecessary questions. He just said, "Give me whatever you've got, and I'll find the rest." I handed over the hotel keycard and a list of the dates Sarah had claimed to be away for work. Mark promised to get back to me within the week. In the meantime, I pretended everything was normal. I smiled when she talked about her day, nodded when she mentioned upcoming work events, even kissed her goodnight as though my heart wasn't breaking into pieces. Inside, I felt like a stranger in my own life, waiting for a shoe I knew would drop. Mark didn't disappoint. A week later, he handed me a manila envelope filled with evidence. Photographs, receipts, a timeline of events, all meticulously compiled. The photos hit me the hardest. There she was, the woman I had vowed to love and cherish, laughing over dinner with a man I barely recognized. The timeline showed hotel stays matching her supposed work trips, charges on her credit card for gifts I had never seen. The final piece was a video, shot from a discreet distance, of the two of them walking into the same hotel together. There was no denying it now. Sarah was having an affair. I stared at the evidence for hours, the weight of it pressing down on me like a physical thing. The betrayal was suffocating. I wanted to confront her, to scream, to demand answers. But I knew I couldn't act on emotion alone. If I wanted to end this, to make her feel the consequences of what she had done, I needed to be cold, calculated, and deliberate. By the time Sarah came home that evening, I had made up my mind. The reckoning would come, but on my terms. She wouldn't see it coming. By the time I woke up the next morning, my plan had already begun to crystallize. Anger simmered beneath my skin, but I buried it deep, knowing that letting it control me now would ruin everything. This wasn't just about confronting Sarah. It was about reclaiming my dignity and ensuring she understood the gravity of what she had done. For the next few days, I carried on as though nothing was amiss. Sarah seemed oblivious, even cheerful, as though the weight of her betrayal didn't exist. She kissed me goodbye in the mornings, texted me reminders about groceries, and even laughed at my jokes during dinner. It was almost comical, her ability to compartmentalize her life like that. But I wasn't laughing. I was preparing. The first step was securing my assets. Our finances were tangled, a shared mortgage, joint accounts, and investments. She had access to everything, but I knew she wouldn't hesitate to exploit it if the situation turned sour. I visited our bank, discreetly shifting funds into a private account under my name. Nothing drastic, just enough to ensure I wasn't left scrambling if this went south. Then, I met with our lawyer, an old family friend who didn't ask too many questions. Think of it as a safety net, I told him, sliding over the manila envelope Mark had given me. In case things escalate. He nodded, his expression grim as he flipped through the photos. "You're sure about this?" "Absolutely," I replied. My voice sounded steady, even to my own ears. "I want everything to be airtight. When the time comes, I don't want her to have any leverage." By the end of the meeting, my plan was officially in motion. The house deed was transferred into my name. The paperwork for a potential separation agreement was drafted and ready, just waiting for my signature. The second step was more personal. I wanted her to feel the weight of her choices, not through anger or violence, but through consequences she couldn't ignore. That evening, while she was out working late, I gathered her belongings. Every piece of her life that she had so casually entwined with mine was packed neatly into boxes and labeled, clothes, jewelry, personal items. Even the sentimental things, our wedding album, the framed photo of us from our first anniversary, went into storage. By the time I finished, her side of the closet was bare, her presence in the house reduced to nothing but empty hangers and an empty bed. The irony wasn't lost on me as I sealed the last box. This was her mess, and now she'd have to face it. I didn't stop there. With the cameras I installed throughout the house, I made sure there wouldn't be any surprises. They were discreet, positioned to capture every corner of our shared space. If she decided to bring him here, or worse, try to turn the tables, I would have the upper hand. I wasn't going to let her rewrite the narrative. When Sarah came home that night, she noticed nothing out of the ordinary. She breezed through the door, kissed me on the cheek, and launched into some story about a difficult client. I nodded along, keeping my expression neutral, while my mind played back the images from the envelope. Her smile, her laugh, they felt foreign now, like watching a stranger wear the face of someone you once loved. "Busy week coming up," she said as we ate dinner. "There's a networking event Friday night, so I'll probably be home late." "Another work thing?" I asked, careful to keep my tone light. "Yeah," she said, not missing a beat. "It's important. You understand, right?" I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "Of course. Whatever you need." She didn't notice the edge in my voice, or if she did, she didn't care. That was the moment I realized just how far gone we were. The Sarah I thought I knew, the woman I had built a life with, wasn't coming back. Friday arrived, and so did the moment I had been waiting for. Sarah left the house dressed to the nines, a red dress that clung to her in all the right places, her heels clicking against the hardwood as she walked out the door. "Don't wait up," she said with a wink. I didn't. An hour later, Mark called. "She's checked in," he said. "Same hotel as last time. Room 403. "Thanks, Mark," I said, hanging up without another word. The next few hours were a blur of meticulous execution. I printed copies of every piece of evidence Mark had gathered and placed them in an envelope addressed to Sarah. Then, I added a letter of my own, spelling out exactly what I knew and what I planned to do. There would be no screaming, no confrontation, just cold, undeniable truth. When Sarah came home the following morning, her heels in hand and the faint scent of cologne lingering on her clothes, she found me waiting for her in the kitchen. I sat at the table, a cup of coffee in front of me, and slid the envelope across to her without a word. "What's this?" she asked, her voice hesitant as she took the envelope. "Read it," I said simply. She opened it, her face draining of color as she flipped through the contents. The photos. The timeline. The receipts. The letter. Her hands trembled, and for the first time in months, she looked at me with something other than indifference. I can explain," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. I stood, the chair scraping against the floor as I pushed it back. "Save it," I said. "Your things are in storage. The locks have been changed. And my lawyer will be in touch." Her eyes filled with tears, but I felt nothing. No pity, no anger, no regret. This was her doing, and now she had to live with it. As I walked past her, out of the house we once called home, I felt a strange sense of clarity. This wasn't the ending I had envisioned for us, but it was the one she had chosen. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The morning air hit me like a cleansing wave as I stepped out of the house. It was strange how a single action, sliding that envelope across the table, could sever 12 years of shared history. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Not yet. My emotions swirled like a storm just below the surface, but I held them at bay. There would be time for grief later, but now, I needed to act. I drove to Mark's office, my mind racing with 1,000 scenarios. Would she fight me on this? Try to manipulate the situation, spin some sob story to our friends or family? Or would she slink away quietly, unable to face the ruin of her own making? Either way, I was ready. Mark greeted me at the door with his usual calm professionalism, though his eyes carried a trace of concern. "You good?" he asked, handing me a fresh cup of coffee. "As good as I can be," I replied. "It's done. She knows." He nodded, sitting across from me. "What's next?" I took a deep breath, the weight of my next steps heavy on my shoulders. "I want to file as soon as possible. Clean break. No room for negotiation. Mark leaned back in his chair, studying me. You've got everything in order, financials, assets, the legal groundwork. But just so you know, this might not be as clean as you'd like. People don't take being exposed lightly, especially not when they're caught in a lie this big. I'm not worried about that, I said, though deep down, I knew he was right. Sarah had always been a fighter when cornered. But this wasn't a battle she could win. Not this time. We spent the next hour reviewing the paperwork my lawyer had prepared. Divorce agreements, custody arrangements for our dog, though thankfully, there were no children caught in the crossfire. Every signature felt like a small dagger to the chest, yet I pressed on. Each stroke of the pen was a step closer to reclaiming my life. When I returned home, the house felt eerily quiet. Sarah's car was gone, as expected, but her presence lingered like a ghost in the empty spaces she once occupied. The kitchen table where we had shared so many meals, the couch where we'd curled up on lazy Sundays, all of it felt tainted now, memories tarnished by her betrayal. I wandered through the house, letting my fingers trail over the furniture, the picture frames, the remnants of a life I no longer recognized. In our bedroom, her side of the closet hung bare, a stark reminder of her absence. On my dresser, the wedding photo we'd framed so proudly sat face down. I hadn't even realized I'd done that. For the first time since this all began, the dam broke. I sank onto the edge of the bed, my head in my hands, and let the tears come. They weren't just tears of sadness, they carried anger, betrayal, even relief. I cried for the man I used to be, the life I thought I had, and the future I'd have to rebuild from scratch. Hours passed in a blur. By the time I pulled myself together, the sun was beginning to set. I checked my phone, no messages from Sarah, no missed calls. Part of me wondered what she was doing, how she was processing everything. But I stopped myself from reaching out. This wasn't my burden to carry anymore. That evening, I called a few close friends. I kept the details sparse, simply telling them that Sarah and I had separated and that things were complicated. Most were supportive, though I could hear the surprise in their voices. We had always been that couple, the ones people looked up to. Perfect on the outside. If only they knew. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects to keep my mind occupied. I started going to the gym again, running until my legs burned, and the only thing I could focus on was the rhythm of my breath. It wasn't a cure, but it helped. Meanwhile, Sarah's silence was deafening. I expected her to call, to argue, to demand answers. But days turned into a week, and she didn't reach out. It was as though she had vanished entirely. I knew she was staying with a friend, Mark had confirmed it, but beyond that, I had no idea what she was thinking. Then, one evening, the call came. I was sitting on the couch, nursing a beer and watching the kind of mindless TV that doesn't require much thought, when my phone buzzed. Her name flashed across the screen. For a moment, I just stared at it, my chest tightening. Part of me didn't want to answer, but I knew I had to. "Hello. Tom," she said, her voice shaky. "Can we talk?" I hesitated, the anger I'd kept at bay bubbling to the surface. "What's there to talk about, Sarah? You made your choice." "I know," she said quickly. "I know I screwed up. But I need to explain. Please." I sighed, leaning back against the couch. "You've got 5 minutes." She hesitated, as though trying to find the right words. "I never meant for this to happen," she began. "It started as a distraction, something I thought would pass. But it got out of hand. I didn't know how to stop." Her words felt hollow, rehearsed. I stayed silent, letting her continue. "I love you, Tom," she said, her voice breaking. "I never stopped loving you. But somewhere along the way, I lost myself. I was stupid, selfish. I didn't think about what I was risking. I clenched my jaw, my grip tightening on the phone. You didn't think about me. About us. I did, she said, almost pleading. I did, but by the time I realized what I'd done, it was too late. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. Her apology hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. For a moment, I considered my response. I could yell, scream, lay into her for everything she'd done. But instead, I chose calm. Sorry doesn't fix this, Sarah, I said quietly. It doesn't erase the lies, the betrayal. You broke something we can't get back. I know, she whispered. But can we try? Please. I'll do whatever it takes. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. It's over, Sarah. I've already filed the papers. You'll get them soon. Her silence was deafening, a mixture of shock and resignation. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. I understand. The line went dead, and I sat there in the dark, the weight of finality settling over me. It wasn't the ending I wanted, but it was the one we deserved. In that moment, I realized that moving on wasn't just about letting go of Sarah. It was about reclaiming myself, the man I had been before her lies took root. And though the path ahead felt uncertain, I knew one thing for sure, I would never let myself be broken like this again. Months passed after the final conversation with Sarah. I thought the worst was behind me. My life had begun to take on a semblance of normalcy again. The divorce was finalized quickly, thanks to the airtight preparation and lack of resistance on Sarah's part. She signed the papers without a fight, her signature a quiet surrender that felt more hollow than triumphant. I threw myself into rebuilding my life. Work consumed most of my days, and when I wasn't at my desk, I was running miles along the river, pushing myself to exhaustion just to feel something other than emptiness. Friends reached out, inviting me to dinners or weekend hikes, but I mostly declined. I told them I was busy, but the truth was, I wasn't ready to face the world yet. Sarah's absence lingered like a phantom in the corners of the house. I had considered selling it, starting fresh somewhere else, but every time I looked at the listings, I stopped. The house felt like mine again, stripped of her influence, but its walls still whispered memories I couldn't escape. One gray November morning, as the first chill of winter set in, I received an unexpected email. It was from Sarah's best friend, Emma, a woman who had never hesitated to tell me what she thought of me. The subject line was simple, urgent. I hesitated before opening it, my gut telling me I wouldn't like what I was about to read. Inside was a single sentence, please call me. It's about Sarah. I sat there, staring at the words for what felt like an eternity. A part of me wanted to ignore it, to let whatever it was remain buried. But curiosity, or maybe guilt, won out. My fingers trembled as I dialed her number. Emma picked up on the first ring. Tom, she said, her voice heavy. Thank you for calling. What's this about? I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. There was a long pause, followed by a shaky breath. It's Sarah. She's gone. The words didn't register at first. What do you mean, gone? I asked, my voice rising. She took her own life, Emma said, her voice cracking. It happened last night. I found her this morning. My heart stopped. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Are you sure? I asked, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. It was a stupid question, but I couldn't process what she was saying. Yes, Emma said, her voice trembling. She left a note. For you. I sat down heavily, the phone clutched in my hand. The edges of my vision blurred as the weight of her words sank in. Sarah, gone. I had spent so much time being angry, so much energy on cutting her out of my life, that I hadn't stopped to consider what it might cost her. Emma's voice pulled me back to reality. "Tom. Are you there?" "I'm here," I whispered. What did the note say?" "I think you should read it yourself," she said. "Can I bring it over?" I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Yeah. Okay." An hour later, Emma arrived, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She handed me an envelope, her hands shaking. "She didn't blame you," she said softly. "But I think you need to see this." I opened the envelope with trembling fingers, pulling out a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was unmistakably Sarah's, neat, precise, and heartbreakingly familiar. "Tom. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me for what I've done, and I don't expect you to. I've spent every day since you walked away from me trying to understand how I let it all fall apart. The truth is, I was lost long before I met you, and I thought you could save me. But no one can save someone who doesn't want to be saved. You deserved better than what I gave you. I don't blame you for leaving. You were right to do it. But the emptiness inside me never left. Losing you just made it louder. Please remember the good times, if you can. I know I don't deserve that kindness, but I hope you can find it in your heart. I hope you find happiness again, Tom. You deserve that. I'm so sorry for everything. Goodbye." I read the letter over and over, the words blurring as tears filled my eyes. The anger I had carried for months dissolved in an instant, replaced by a hollow ache I couldn't describe. She was gone, and no amount of anger or regret could bring her back. I looked up at Emma, who was watching me with a mix of pity and sorrow. "I didn't know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know she was this far gone." "None of us did," Emma said softly. "She hid it well. Too well." That night, I sat in the quiet of my house, Sarah's letter clutched in my hands. I thought about the life we had shared, the good and the bad, the love and the betrayal. I thought about all the ways I could have done things differently, how I could have seen the signs, how I could have helped her instead of cutting her out so completely. But it was too late for that now. Grief is a strange thing. It comes in waves, crashing over you when you least expect it. I spent the weeks that followed trying to piece myself back together, but a part of me knew I would never be whole again. Sarah's absence was a void I couldn't fill, a reminder of the life we had lost, not just to her betrayal, but to the pain that had consumed her in the end. I found myself visiting her grave often, standing in the silence and wondering what could have been. And though I couldn't forgive her entirely, I could let go of the anger, the bitterness. In the end, all that remained was sorrow and the hope that, wherever she was, she had finally found peace.